days, or with the social media, the people run ahead and they have the conversation. But we realize there hasn't been opportunity, and it's a good thing that this is happening, for you to seek clarifications on particularly some of the more technical things, some of the more nuanced things. So when we look at the questions which are coming through from the people, we realize that the media is going to be very important in helping to break down these manifestos. And we are doing this so that it's not just ours, so that all the manifestos are broken down. And then obviously that helps the people make informed choices. We will organize this around 3 issues and a 4th, which I'll mention. Our manifesto speaks to the following question: what are the challenges that the country is facing now? The character of the challenges that the country is facing, and what solutions does our manifesto propose for those challenges? And we've organized them into 3 boxes of challenges. One is around the transition to democracy, which we have been going on for now almost, this is our how many election? Multi-party election. There are still things that we need to do, and we speak to those issues about how do we complete this transition. Do we complete it or do we go backwards? And you can see that as a debate around the BBI question, which is proposing for us one alternative. And our manifesto, although it doesn't look very loud, is actually speaking to a different approach, where we are politically. So where are we politically, and where do we need to go? That's one set of questions. The second set of questions is about very topical subject, in the country: governance, accountability of the state in particular. So you come from the state to government. How do we hold our government accountable? And particularly on the issues of corruption. Again, this is very topical. It's one of the areas that Kenyans want to know. What is the offerings? How credible is what each side is saying? And that's the second sort of issues. And the third, of course, is the socio-economic. And I think right now the accent is on economic. Because we are in economic crisis. So how does our manifesto speak to those 2 things? The 4th point is about process. How have we arrived at it? Obviously, you've all seen that we've been holding huge meetings around the country. I think we've interacted with probably about 90,000 people. We have held a pitch tent in practically every county in this country, every county, not practically every county. We have engaged our diaspora very extensively, physically and virtually in very many meetings. And so there is some background to this manifesto and a process that is completely new. It hasn't been done before. And we think that it's important that that also gets elevated. So I will open and speak to the economic because I have the mic. And then my colleagues, Ababu here, will speak to the political, the choices that we are making, as well as our external relations, very much speaking to regional issues and foreign issues. And then my colleague here, Koreo, will speak to the governance. One of the briefs that he holds in his day job is something called the Open Governance Partnership. It's a global compact on accountability of the states to citizens. Therefore, he is very, very well equipped to speak to that as an expert. On the socioeconomics, I think it's useful to talk about also what's the difference between the manifestos as we see them. Our manifesto, we have called it the plan. And we have called it the plan because it is a plan. Some of the reaction we have had from commentators and our opponents is that our manifesto is too detailed. And a manifesto should be a statement of intent, a declaration of intent. So we see our opponent's manifesto as a declaration of intent, so let's call it that way because that's what they have called it. These are the things we intend, we would like to do, in no particular order. You know, when you are declaring things, you put them in a list. You know, it's a long list of, let's call it a wish list. We would like to do this. A plan is methodical. When you plan, you do it methodically. So you say, we will start at point A, move to point B, move to point C. So our manifesto is called the plan because we're saying the economic situation in particular that we are in, we require the next government to hit the ground running. And you hit the ground running only if you have a plan, which is prioritized, which is sequenced, which is financed, and which you have the operational mechanisms for executing already in your mind, so that when you hit the ground, you execute. So you will find that our manifesto, the plan, speaks a lot. It has got a lot more what you call policy analysis than would be in a declaration of intent. It says the challenge we are facing here is this one. And this is why it is important to go about it this way. So this is what we will prioritize there. So that's what a plan is. A plan is I have to prioritize things. I can't do everything at once. You could do 50 things. But which is the 80, use the 80-20 rule. Which is the 20% which will give you the 80% of the impact. Then how do you sequence them so that you get quick wins? And obviously it has to be paid for. And how do you pay for it? That's very critical. When you go through our manifesto about what, we start by saying what economic situation are we facing as a country. We have called that in the manifesto a perfect storm. We have called it a perfect storm because it's a convergence of three forces that you don't want to converge on you, but they have. The first of these is underlying problem of an economy that does not create jobs, and an economy that has reduced its capacity to be productive. And those two things are related. Because if you have low productivity, then you don't have high incomes that can, a big market that can create jobs. On that problem, we have built on it a debt crisis. And that debt crisis has made us, has put the government in what you might call a fiscal straitjacket. So if you're in a debt situation, even if you're a business or if you are an individual yourself, you have very little room to maneuver. You know what a debt situation where your outgoings are bigger than your incomings, they put you in a box, isn't it? So we have debt which has put us in a box. That box now is such that interest only on our debt is the biggest expenditure item on the recurrent budget. This year we have budgeted 660 billion shillings for interest alone. The national government wage bill is about 600 billion. So you can see if you are paying more money in interest than you are paying your staff in a business, you have a problem. So in a country also, you have a problem. It has also done something else. For the first time, we have borrowed heavily from commercial markets abroad. So what we have borrowed domestically, which is a lot, the debt is half-half, that interest, 660, of that, 500 is domestic interest. Only 160 is foreign. Yeah? So we've borrowed heavily domestically and abroad, and what we have borrowed domestically has crowded out the private sector. That is partly the reason why we are suffering from low productivity and lack of creation of jobs, because we've taken away the money from private sector and put it in concrete the kind of concrete we are seeing down here, which is not productive. Then we have also borrowed abroad. When you borrowed abroad, it means that you are exposed to the vagaries of financial markets as they move. And that is the first time. It is the first time we have sovereign foreign debt, bonds issued in the market. We had never done it before. That's completely new. So on that, it means that we are very exposed to external shocks, economic shocks in the global system. And that's the third thing that has happened, that those global shocks that we are exposed to have happened. We have had two in a row, COVID and a war. So those two things mean that the prices of goods we import has really gone up. And the interest rates globally are going up. So the cost of our debt is going up globally. The cost of the things we import has gone up. So that impacts on cost of living. And you will be aware that for the first time since the early 90s, we are now rationing foreign exchange. When you ration foreign exchange for manufacturers, what happens? They shut down. Many people in the edible oil business, a few have shut down. Quite a few others are operating at 50% capacity or below. And the ones that I have spoken to say that they will not last another month with the kind of foreign exchange crisis that there is. So we say whatever we would have liked to do when we set out on this campaign 6-7 months ago, when whoever gets into government will have to hit the ground running and turn around this economy stabilize the situation in less than a year, and then turn it around in less than 3 years. Otherwise, the things which are happening, we are seeing happening in Sri Lanka and other places, will happen here. So our manifesto is a plan to deal with that. And so when you read it with that lens, you will see that it says we have identified the sectors that hit three things very quickly. The sectors that stimulate the economy very quickly so that it creates jobs, increases incomes of people, and those incomes increase our tax revenue and increase demand so that government can become creditworthy again and be able to pay its bills, and businesses can wake up. Business can recover. So a very quick recovery. It also has to hit that foreign exchange crisis very quickly. So we need things which will reduce our import, where we can reduce our import bill very quickly, and where we can stimulate exports very quickly so that our foreign exchange balance improves. It also has to start creating jobs for young people, because the more frustrated the young people become, the more an economic crisis portends political risk. It also has to deal with the problem we have had for a very long time called hunger, because we have 1 out of 5, 6 Kenyans goes hungry every other day. They just don't have enough to eat. And most of them are poor farmers. And as we say, a hungry man is an angry man. So if you look at that plan, it says the sector that puts incomes in the most number of people's pockets, the sector that will cut our cost of living quickest, and the sector that can stimulate the economy fastest is agriculture. So if we are in a crisis and you start saying that our goal is to industrialize, are we going to industrialize in the next 18 months? You see what I mean by prioritization? So people are asking, how can you not talk about industrialization? Say, good people, first of all, can we bring down the cost of edible cooking oil before we start talking about things which which is a sort of wish list of things. Because agriculture does not need new investment. We don't need investors to come and start new factories and all sorts of things. We need farmers to get inputs for the next season, so that instead of harvesting 4 bags of maize per acre, they harvest 10. Yeah? If you raise agricultural productivity, you are able to increase the incomes of farmers and also lower the cost of food to consumers. And food accounts for half of our budgets. Our current national food expenditure is about 3.3 trillion shillings. If you can cut that by 10% for people, you have reduced, you have generated extra income of 300 and something billion shillings that they can spend on other things, which then stimulate the economy. So the other thing is agriculture. Only 20% of agricultural value chain is farming. The rest of it is things which go into agriculture, agro-processing, inputs, agrochemicals and things, and fertilizers and transport. And then the output, how you move the output from point A to B, packaging, processing. So that's why agriculture is very high up there. The second sector we have identified is housing. Why? Because we have a housing crisis. We need 250,000 units of houses a year. We are only producing 50,000, and all those 50,000 are upmarket. Our urbanization rate is 4% plus. So what we are doing is slumification, not urbanization. So we are having slumification of our cities and towns. We already have a backlog of 2 million houses. So we're saying there is a market for houses. It also so happens that the building houses has connections with very many sectors. If you're building, you're producing windows and doors. You're producing cement. Yeah? You're producing fittings. You are employing lots of fundis. Once the houses are finished and people are able to move in, they need to furnish them. They need to buy curtains. Yeah? So, if you make houses affordable by scaling up the number of units you are producing, so that you provide finance to scale up the number of units you are producing so that the unit cost comes down, and then you provide finance for people to purchase. So you provide long-term mortgages at very low interest, because that's possible, the money exists sitting in other places. So if you can produce houses that people would like, people who are living in currently very poor quality housing can rent or pay a mortgage of something between 10 and 20,000. We think it's possible, because you can do that. It is possible to produce houses and put them on the market at between 1.5 to 2 million shillings if you do it at sufficient scale and you deal with a few other things. So we have said this is a quick win because it is shovel ready, literally. The county of Nairobi has 2,000 acres of public sort of housing, what you used to call city housing, council housing, a lot of it in very poor condition. So if we just sit down with the City Council of Nairobi, Nairobi City County, and we say, how do we structure financing so that you can build a high density housing, where right now we have those little ugly houses on Jogo Road. That's a shovel-ready sector. We are building a city in Kwanza we keep calling Tech City. Can we just call it a city? It doesn't have to be only tech. Can we shift our manufacturing there? Because there is now a railway. Yeah, there's a lot of land around it. Can we think about a city of 1.5 to 2 million people to decongest Nairobi? Now, a project can get a lot of shovels and wheelbarrows working. So that's another sector we see as a sector which will kickstart the economy. I am just describing how you read our manifesto. You will also find a lot of reference to the ICT sector, what we're calling a superhighway. Why? Because we have put in the backbone already. We have put in the digital backbone. What we are lacking is the last mile, particularly for rural areas. It turns out we can do that very cheaply. And if we do that very cheaply, we can then make the cost of doing business for small businesses out there in the countryside, in the small towns and villages, very low. If we close what we call the bright lights gap between the cities and the small town, then those people in the small towns don't need to move to the cities because they can plug in. Once you are plugged in into the internet without really having to pay an arm and a leg for bundles, I think then you can encourage a more rational urbanization where we have nice small towns that people can live in out there other than all moving into the cities and slums. And that's something, that last mile thing, turns out it will only cost us about 40, 50 billion shillings, which we already collect through something called a universal service fund. Just by way of example. And then unleash creativity, the content generation, things that the young people are doing, you find a lot of that. You find that we have really privileged health. Why? Because health is costing us a lot of money out of pocket. Of the money we are spending 550 billion shillings on healthcare, 150 billion we are paying out of pocket. And I saw the members of our health team here. I saw Dr. Gibore. I don't see, where is he? Here he is. I thought I saw Thuranira. No, yeah, Dr. Thuranira is not here. We have a health sector team that has worked for almost 2 years now to come up with a universal healthcare we can roll out so that we stop doing harambes and putting our logbooks and things in the bank to raise 1 million shillings for our mothers and fathers and even ourselves who may have a critical illness, cancer, cardiovascular, to send them to India, all of that. You can send them, but what we want to do, we want to put all that in one insurance scheme. We have seen it's possible if we have universal coverage for very little money per family, no more than 3,000 to 4,000 shillings per family per month. We can actually raise 200 billion shillings for that universal fund. It's not difficult for you to do the math because we have 50 million Kenyans. So 50 million Kenyans times 4,000, how much is that? It's 200 billion, isn't it? You don't do bad. So if you take the average number of members per family, you get to a figure of about 20,000. And if you get to a figure of about 20,000 and you divide it monthly, you'll get a number which is not very high. So it's doable. And then if you do that, these outgoings which are impoverishing people and making us, in Kenya, the World Bank data shows that 1/3 of the households, 1 out of 3, is at the risk of being impoverished by a catastrophic illness. And we know that. Because then we have to be taking care of chronic illnesses. If you are members of a family, you come together and say we have to be contributing 20,000 a month for mom or aunties or somebody's chronic illness. We want to take that burden off the people. And we think that will have a very huge impact on the economy. I won't go to the whole of it, but if you look at every sector, we have used that kind of, that's what I call very sort of evidence-based, detailed policy analysis, so that we can say this is why these are the priorities we have highlighted. This is how they are connected. Housing is connected to jobs through manufacturing and small business. Agriculture is connected to jobs through leather industry, and it is connected to foreign exchange, because if we ramp up, our second largest import after petroleum is edible oils, palm oil. Last year we imported 1 million metric tons at 90 billion shillings. If we can produce half of that, that's $600, $700 million, isn't it? If we can produce half of that, it means we save $300 million, and that $300 million ends up with our farmers. And then the farmers spend it and it ends up as income for a business elsewhere, and that ends up as tax revenue for the government. So that's the nature of the manifesto. That's why we are calling it a plan, because everything which is in there is part of solving the problem that we have. There's a famous economist who likes to say that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We think that this economic crisis should concentrate our minds on not just tiding ourselves over the turbulence, but actually getting to grip with the fundamental structural issues that are making us very vulnerable to these challenges, that made us think that if we borrow huge amounts of money and build infrastructure, we will then solve our economic problem. And we've seen that the reason why we are trying to do that is because we thought we need to spend a lot of money, but we think about production. Thank you very much. I will now turn to, I think, who wants to start? You think you should go first? And then you can end with Cornelia. Actually. Switch.
Thank you, David. Let me briefly amplify, add some flesh on our foreign policy governance segment of our plan, what we are calling the plan. But in ordinary Kenyan parlance, it's just manifesto. Our foreign policy, as elucidated in the plan, is built around the whole notion of Kenya as a regional anchor state and a significant player in some key regional and global agenda like peace, security, efforts around the world. And the first question we have posed to ourselves is, what makes Kenya the regional anchor state? And our answer is, Kenya is a regional anchor state because of its relative stability. It is because of the relative stability of this country that Nairobi today plays host to the only United Nations headquarters in the global south. The United Nations office in Nairobi, UNEP, UN Habitat are all headquartered here, the only UN offices in the global south. It's because of this relative stability that Nairobi is regarded as a business, commercial, economic hub and a center of convergence for so many interests in that regard. Any sign of instability would certainly scatter that pedigree, that credibility of being an anchor state and a hub for all these interests that converge here in Nairobi and in Kenya. And therefore, we believe that it is important, it's actually critical, that we make every effort to sustain and maintain this stability. And we have come to the conclusion that there are certain basic imperatives we must remain alive to in sustaining this stability. One is inclusivity. at the very heart of stability is inclusivity. We must have a Kenya that is firmly anchored on both political and economic inclusivity. Indeed, the very essence of the bottom-up economic model is to open up the economic space for a large segment of Kenya that have traditionally, historically felt excluded to become part of the economic mainstream of this country. And therefore, the bottom-up economic model for us ticks a very key box in the whole agenda of inclusivity as a prerequisite for stability or continued stability of this country. The second limb of that inclusivity agenda is political inclusivity, making sure that the broadest majority of our people feel included in the political processes of this country. Political inclusivity extends to having political parties that are democratic, political parties that are broad-based, political parties that break down walls, boundaries of ethnicity and regionalism. And indeed, the very nature and character of a United Democratic Alliance, UDA, as a national party, is intended to project that vision, that goal of having political movements or political platforms that engender inclusivity. The very nature of our Kwanza Alliance is in the same mold of promoting political inclusivity. And we believe that if you promote inclusivity, you guard Kenya's stability. Another key element in this whole stability agenda is completing the transition to a full constitutional democracy. You look at the region we live in, the Great Lakes region, the East African region, the Horn of Africa region, and you realize that Kenya is pretty much like a lone candle in the wind as a democracy, as a constitutional democracy for that matter. And if this candle were to go out, the whole Horn of Africa, Great Lakes region would pretty much be plunged into darkness. And just to emphasize the importance of protecting our credentials as a constitutional democracy, you could look at the challenges some of our neighbors confront or continue to face. If you look at some of the countries where Kenya is actively involved in trying to stabilize and even rebuild statehood, countries like Somalia, South Sudan, the Sudan, Khartoum, they are countries whose greatest challenge today is to return to the democratic straight and narrow. Ethiopia, a significant neighbor to our north, is a core anchor state in this region. And the challenges experienced in Ethiopia today remind us of the imperative, the need for us to jealously protect Kenya's credentials as a constitutional democracy. And so every effort, we believe, must be made to complete the full implementation of our constitution, our 2010 constitution. Pending tasks like operationalization of the judiciary fund are key elements of concluding that implementation of the constitution. Completing the transfer of responsibilities to county governments so that you completely institutionalize and stabilize devolution in the context of the responsibilities assigned to devolved units is important in completing implementation of this constitution. Key in this agenda of completing the implementation of the 2010 constitution is what we are calling institutionalizing governance as opposed to personalizing governance. Building a governance culture that is anchored on institutions and not personalities. And the reason why we believe that the very conceptualization, the very DNA of BBI was problematic was because of the focus on the personal rather than the institutional. And so you will find a very, very strong pitch for institutional versus personal in that whole area of completing the implementation of our constitution. Even these often discussed question of integrity and the war on corruption, and I believe my brother Dr. Singoe is going to go a little deeper on that particular issue, must be seen in the context of our belief that the question of integrity and the war on corruption must be fought within parameters of the institutional rather than the personal. Let me quickly conclude by saying that our foreign policy, therefore, will be firmly anchored on pushing Kenya's strategic national interest, but emanating from this stability agenda. We want to jealously guard Kenya's stability because only then, only a stable Kenya will continue to be a regional anchor state. Only a stable Kenya will continue to play a role in international or global peace and security measures. Only a stable Kenya can contribute boots on the ground in troubled spots across the world, which is a key element of Kenya's diplomatic engagement with the world. You are not going to do that if you need these forces to secure your own troubled spots domestically. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see a foreign policy that is very robust, that is very creative, and that is very engaged. A Kenya Kwanza government will be a very engaged government, a very hands-on government in terms of how we deploy foreign policy. We are not going to sit back and wait for issues, for instance, the big maritime question between Kenya and Somalia is a question where robustness, creativity, and more engagement would certainly offer a resolution to that outstanding issue with an important regional neighbor. You're also going to see a foreign policy that emphasizes economic and commercial diplomacy, because as we talk about expanding this economy, as we talk about growing agriculture, as we talk about building agri-based manufacturing, we need markets. And we want to engage the world in a way that opens up markets for our products, that offers opportunity for growth that can be felt by the widest possible majority of our people. Finally, you're going to see very robust inclusion of our diaspora. We believe that the Kenyan diaspora is a key segment of our statehood, of our nationhood, and must be fully and substantively engaged in our national development agenda. Diaspora remittances today account for the most significant foreign revenue stream into our economy. The last central bank review placed it at 3.75 billion US dollars. That's about 470 billion Kenya shillings. The single largest foreign currency stream into this economy. We don't just want to see our diaspora in terms of remittances. We want to see diaspora as a substantive cog in the economic development of this country. We want to make it easy for our diaspora to be an investment pool. We want to make it easy for our diaspora to contribute to policy and legislation and governance generally. And so we want to tell our diaspora out there, a Kenya Kwanza government is one where you'll find substantive space and not superficial engagement. I thank you. Daktari?
Gentlemen of the media, I think in continuing with the conversation that both Dr. Ndi and my brother Ababu have initiated, my focus really is going to be on the governance piece. And I think we must acknowledge that obviously the 2010 Constitution has provided quite some important overarching frameworks and mechanisms to ensure good governance in our country. However, challenges continue to be replete, and so as Kenya Kwanza, we've been struggling with understanding how we can address these governance challenges. And to our mind, there are two fundamental challenges that have been raised. One relates to corruption, the other one relates to rule of law writ large. In relation to corruption, the approach taken by the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto is a threefold approach. We will attack corruption through preventative means, through curative means, and through systemic means. We will not wait for corruption to happen. We will seek to prevent the occurrence of corruption. And that is what we call preventative. It is our premise that the number one cause of corruption is opaqueness. When you run an opaque government, when there is limited transparency, when you run a serikali system, you run the risk of budgeting corruption, and you run the risk of festering corruption, especially in procurement systems. And so the number one preventative response, and we have seen this work, is to run a very open government. Openness has been demonstrated as having the capacity to engender horizontal accountability, because what happens is that you give the people information about decisions that government is going to make, including decisions touching on procurement. Openness means also that you are able to know as a citizen who or which entities are doing business with government. And that is why when you scrutinize the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, you will see a concept that we have developed called beneficial ownership transparency. And beneficial ownership, thanks to the work that we have been doing over the last few years, is now incorporated into our companies law in section 93. The common law position in relation to companies is about the ownership of a company. And so you really don't know who the persons are behind a given company, because a company itself is a legal person. However, the notion of beneficial ownership is that you lift the veil by statute. And once that veil is lifted, then you are able to know which characters are these who are building our railway. And you're not just going to say which characters are the ones who are directly building the railway, but you will be asking yourself the question of who is the ultimate beneficiary. And so through a beneficial ownership transparency framework, citizens will be empowered to know ex ante who is doing business with government, and who is the ultimate beneficiary, of whatever contracts government is engaged in. The number two response that we propose, and it is already in the law, and Honorable Ababu has already alluded to, is this idea of depoliticization and institutionalization of the fight against corruption. And when you look at our manifesto, there are very clear proposals, around financial autonomy and financial independence of both the judiciary, the DPP, the IGP, and all these array of institutions that already are there in the Constitution. But also, it is really a very deliberate posture on the part of the executive, which involves removing oneself from, in any manner, getting involved in the decision-making processes of these institutions. And so when you strengthen the judiciary, when you establish the judiciary fund, when you give financial autonomy to the IGP, among others, then our view really is that you build sufficient capacity to be able to ensure that you're able to cure corruption. But ladies and gentlemen, the biggest problem around corruption that we have is what we call systemic corruption. When you look across the lay of the land, you see systematic plunder of national wealth and national assets. You see wanton economic spoliation. You see unjust enrichment of a scale hitherto unimagined. And so, how do you deal with a problem so systemic and so grand as this? Our proposal is to look back at some of the ways in which we have sought to address the problem. So, for instance, when in 2002 the Kibaki administration came to power, there was such deep conflict within the judiciary in terms of conflict of interest, in terms of corruption, to an extent where it was not really possible to use the normal mechanisms to be able to deal with the problem. And so what happened is that there was a whole vetting framework of the entire cohort of judicial officers. Secondly, in the context, for example, of a grand corruption issue that arose within that time, the Golden Bag scandal, there was also the realization that the judicial infrastructure would just be overwhelmed. The sheer weight of evidence would take years to be able to, to go through. The expertise required in terms of forensic expertise to be able to examine some of that evidence was not available at that point in time. And so government at that point in time said, look, we will set up a Golden Bag Commission to be able to deal with these issues. And so in line with that, and looking as well, at some of the things that our neighbors are doing, especially in the Southern African region, it is the proposal of the Kwanza government to establish a quasi-judicial state capture commission that is then going to ask itself very, very difficult questions around how strategic national assets, critical national wealth, has become systematically plundered and privatized, among others. And so that commission is going to be put in place according to our manifesto within a very, very short time. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, is the question of rule of law. One of the things that is most concerning within the current environment is what we consider to be the emasculation of the office of Attorney General. The State Law Office plays such a critical role in relation not only to defending the public interest and defending government, but also ensuring that in the process of negotiating, for government contracts, that the public interest is taken care of. And so you see in our manifesto very, very specific recommendations around strengthening that office so that it can play not a political role, but a role that is consistent with its defense of the national interest, both at the national level and at the county level. And so you would see, for example, that that office will be, its current budget is in the region of about 3 or 4 billion shillings. I mean, it's a pittance really compared to, compared to NIS, for example.
40 billion.
I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous, and it speaks a lot to the lack of prioritization towards rule of law and good governance, and that is going to change under Kenya Kwanza administration. But additionally, there have been numerous cases or numerous decisions against the Kenya government that have not been implemented. A lot of you hear hue and cry across the country about non-implementation of judicial decisions. That is a violation of our constitution. The Kenya Kwanza administration will, in the immediate future, upon acceding to office, set up a mechanism to review all decisions, touching on the Kenyan government. It will develop a very systematic plan for ensuring that those decisions, are implemented. And if peradventure there is need to review some of the decisions, then a mechanism would also be put in place. And so I think I really don't want to take so much time with this. But again, just to mention or to reiterate what my colleagues have said, that the governance is a very central pillar within the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto. And yes, we do have a plan to address not just corruption, but systemic plunder and and privatization of public assets and public property. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will field questions as hopefully all your questions. Let me sort of add something that I may have overlooked. When I was talking about our key economy, which is a huge pillar, and the reason why probably I overlooked it is because it is not one sector. It is actually the entire economy. If you look at our entire economy, we have a workforce of 19 odd million people. The corporate economy only employs 3 million people. The what we call formal establishments, people on payrolls who get a pay slip either from government or from a private company like yourselves, only 3 million people. 6 million people work in small enterprises, formal ones, and then we have 10 million people who don't work anywhere. They're in the informal sector. I like to characterize this as a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, you have what I'm calling white collar. The small, where you guys belong is white collar. Those are the jobs all the Kenyans leaving school want. Then we have blue collar. That's what we're calling the MSMEs, for more small businesses. They employ about 6 million people. And then we have what I'm calling no collar. The people who are not collared. they have no collar. They have not been collared yet. So they are in what we call a lottery economy. Because they have no collar, whether they are going to a white collar or a blue collar job, they go to any job. They wake up Sometimes they are selling padlocks on the street. Sometimes they are selling apples and fruits. The other time they are selling, it doesn't matter. Bananas, what I can sell today, we call it lottery because it's a pata potea economy. Leo unapata, kesho unapoteza. You know, you're doing your sugarcane by the roadside on a wheelbarrow, and then you don't know whether you're going to go home with money or your county court and lose your wares. Now, the crisis of employment, why I probably didn't dwell on it, because I talked about the crisis of employment, said the corporate economy is only employing 50,000 people a year. We have 800,000 young people who are joining the workforce every year. Of those 800,000, the corporate economy is only employing 50,000. The blue collar is absorbing about 150,000. 600,000 are swelling the ranks of the no collar, the lottery economy. How long can we go with that? They're already 10 million. So if we don't do anything in the next 5 years, add 600,000 times 5, there will be 13 million. There will be now more who have joined it than the entire white collar sector. Now the trouble we have, and this is the basis, again I talk about policy analysis. If you look at our data, we have the most capital intensive formal economy at our level of development. In the manufacturing sector, it takes more than 1 million shillings to create one job, one white-collar job in a big industry. The average for Africa is $6,000, which is about half that. In South Asia, the people we are competing with, it's $1,000, $2,000. Now, you can create, in the short term, decent jobs in the no-collar sector at 50,000 shillings. We know that because you see it. Somebody is on the street today, tomorrow they get a micro loan, and they actually have a premise where they can do business, they're not being changed, and you actually are able to make 400-500 shillings a day. So, you're saying if it takes more than 1 million shillings to create a white-collar job, so one white-collar, new white-collar job is 20 jobs in the blue, in the no-collar. It is 5 jobs in the blue-collar and 20 jobs. So if you can create 20 jobs with that capital, and there you are doing 50,000, 50,000 times 20 is 1 million. So the opportunity cost of the white-collar economy is the entire employment issue in Kenya. We have to change the way we allocate capital, because this capital does not belong to those people creating white-collar jobs. They are the people who have privatized the state, what you're calling state capture, so that it makes policy which is favorable to them. This capital belongs to the country. It's our savings. It is the money which is borrowed in our name by the government. That's how you create capital. But it is being purposed to only benefit the big guys, where it earns a lot of profits. If you look at our manifesto, we give a very good example of tourism industry. We say our tourism industry is a rent-seeking economy, and I have no problem saying that. Why rent-seeking? Because you take a 10,000 square kilometers of Kenyan land, you call it a private reserve, you put in 2 or 3 tented camps, you charge $500,000 shillings a day, and for those people to pay 500,000 shillings or 300,000 shillings, it means they must not see a native, they must not see cattle. Yeah? Yet, so you have made it, what they are really making money from is not the capital they have invested, but the fact they have enclosed a huge chunk of land for a few people to come and drive around in land cruisers. We have to change that to create a tourism sector which creates jobs for the masses. And that's, I want to make the point that the micro and small enterprise, where the vast majority of Kenyans are working, is really the fundamental. When you talk about bottom up, that's what about it is. It is about turning this thing upside down so that our capital goes where it will create jobs. And I thought that was an important thing I had overlooked. Thank you very much. Now we'll take your questions.
My name is Elima from Kwanza.
Pardon me?
My name is Elima.
Do you have a mic? Do you have a mic ourselves? Or please, yeah.
My name is Erin Mwangi from Capital FM. My question is, when you started the explanation on Kenya Kwanza Manifesto, you said that the past year will be the year to stabilize the economy, to sort of say, rectify the financial mistakes that, the Jubilee government has made. Is that to say that Kenyans will have to brace with the tough economic times they are facing currently, at least for a year, before Kenya Kwanza, if they will get into the government, manage to stabilize the economic situation in the country? Secondly, when I look into some of the issues that you have explained, they replicate the Big Four agenda apart from the aspect of manufacturing. Is it to, I know you've said that this manifesto is people-driven, but is it to say that Deputy President William Ruto is trying to, do what he was unable to do with President Uhuru Kenyatta through the Kenya Kwanza government? Thank you.
Another question before we take Francis. Apollo.
Apollo TV 47 Doctor. What do you say? I know you've spoken extensively about areas the manifesto speaks of to stimulate the economy. But what do you say to critics who say corruption is a major obstacle to economic growth? And in terms of this transition from Jubilee to you, if you take over, what kind of transition are we likely to see as far as economic and political governance is concerned? I think it might be general, but
well, my name is Stephen Maura from Minimax. In terms of governance, you said within 30 days you will form a quasi-judicial public inquiry to establish the extent of cronyism and state capture in the nation. How well will you engineer this to avoid a conflict between the independent institution and, at this point, you're talking about the judiciary?
We do that first. Thank you very much. I think that's absolutely the reason why we needed this. I will deal with economic, and then I will hand over, of course, the governance to the people. Stabilization of the economy, will the pain last? I think it is possible to turn around some things fairly quickly. Fortunately for me, I've been here before. This is the situation we found in 2003 when NAC came to power. And the economy had been very bad for probably 3 to 4 years. So the fact that there are some things you cannot fix immediately, but there are some things we think we can fix very quickly. And if you see our manifesto, we have talked, for instance, of the pending bills problem. Now, the pending bills problem has been with us for a long time. It's now, I understand, 500 billion shillings. We think we can resolve that in 3 months, because what you do is just do a transaction to do that off budget, securitize those bills, so that now what we're trying to do, we're trying to pay pending bills by allocating the money in the budget, and you clear them with cash. Of course, you don't have the cash. So we promise that we will clear them, but we don't have the cash. What we do is we're going to take those bills, create a special purpose vehicle. On this side, you have a special purpose vehicle. On this side, you have investors who have cash that they would like to get a return. And then on this side, you have the people who take the cash, and the investors are left with securities. That's what we mean by securitization. If we are able to do that very quickly, and we put 500 billion shillings back into the working capital of businesses, especially small businesses, that can begin to address the pain. In terms of the food, we think there is some things you can't avoid, because Even if you start growing soybean, it's a 3-month crop. So you have to wait for the rains. No, so you cannot plant before March. But I think if you're talking about if we really scale up that very dramatically, you could probably begin to deal with the edible oils sort of prices within by the end of the year. I was checking the global prices of soybean, and even though there's a shortage, the price is still enough. Farmers are paying 80 shillings per kilo. The world price is still around 20 shillings per kilo. But of course, small businesses cannot be able to import. So this is the kind of thing that the state can intervene, and actually our annual requirement is only 80,000 metric tons. So when I did the math, if the state could organize all the people who need to import soybean so that we can do both cooking oil and animal feeds, you probably don't need for a sort of credit guarantee of more than 150 million shillings so that you can do a bulk import and be able to do that. So that's why we say it's a plan. We ask what are our quick wins. We have tried to sequence our quick wins to things which we can achieve in 3 months. If you look at the plan, 6, 9, so that we start easing the pain. But it will not go, it's like a toothache, you know. We cannot really say that it will go away on the spot. But we have had experience of turning this economy around in a very short time. And we think that it is possible. Replicating the Big Four agenda, good people. If you start addressing the challenges facing a country, you will end up in the same place, unless it's different countries. You will hear the people, because even Jubilee has been listening to the people. You will think, you will hear, you will look and see which sectors can create jobs quickly. You will know that there is food is a big thing, so you will end up in agriculture, isn't it? You will know that energy prices are a big problem. So you will ask, how can we cut energy prices, but we don't have control of OPEC. We cannot bring down global oil prices. So you start thinking about alternatives, like we are talking about accelerating electric vehicle sort of industry, so that because we can get cheap power, but we cannot get cheap petroleum. So when we talk about replicating the before, look at the Azimio Manifesto as well. There are only so many sectors in the economy. You know, it cannot be completely looking different. So that's not something that I think is a big issue. Any sound, evidence-based policy analysis will take you to the same places. What you then say is, how different is the way we are approaching them? And if you look at everything we are saying, is that the problem is not the sectors. The problem is the order. We are saying the focus is up here on all these sectors. The policy and capital has been captive up here. We say what we need is to dismantle that that structure and bring the capital and the policy down here. That's the big difference. But the sectors are the same. They have to be the same. Corruption is a major obstacle. Good people. We cannot reduce, you are our interlocutors. We cannot reduce our national discourse to 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. So that we keep harping on, hey, corruption is a problem, but we do not actually haven't unpacked it. You say, no, if you make corruption go away overnight, we will save 2 billion shillings a day, and then we will have the money to do all the things. That is refusing to think. And it would be very unfortunate that if our media is lulled by a chorus. Dr. Singwe here, who has said, prevention is about openness. If you go to our manifesto, in the section on power, we have said, this IPP sector is opaque. So that's one sector we need to open so that we see how the transactions between Kenya Power and the IPPs are done. And we have said we will ask the regulator to publish quarterly reports on financial and operational performance. So we know why is a particular IPP being dispatched. while another one would be cheaper to provide power at that particular time. So we do this, those reports are posted, and then you get them, you blow the whistle, and we get horizontal accountability. That is prevention. We have then said there's a whole host of things you need to do when it actually happens so that the institutions that we deal with it are independent. And then we have said there is a systemic. And that systemic needs a systemic approach. I was there when we were doing the Golden Bag Commission. And the reason why we did the Golden Bag Commission was because, in fact, Kamlesh Patni had captured the judiciary. Judgments were being written in his office and delivered to judges. So there is no way you are going to do this within the judiciary. So you said we have to take this golden bag thing out of the judiciary and put it in KICC so that we can clean up the judiciary. State has been privatized. So you are not going to do this if the people who have privatized the state are still in the state. So you take this thing out and you tell Kenyans, if you are in a place where you have encountered privatization of the state, please write a memorandum. Please come even if you have to testify in camera. We have to ask, why are we seeing the tax authority being weaponized to hit some businesses, either for political reasons or for because they are business rivals? I know, for example, that there are some people, influential people, who have been wanting to put up a brewery in Naivasha together with some foreign brands. And I cannot help asking, is Keroshe's troubles with the tax authorities to do with predation, so that they can take her out and put their private brewery? And this is not secret information. If you look at the newspapers, you will see that. So let's not reduce corruption to a chorus. See, oh, the problem is corruption. Once we solve it, all other things will go away. It is not going to happen. So the question of state capture around conflict, I'll ask him to elaborate. And so that's it. And I think there are on some of the political questions, we might ask for help from some of our other members of the panel, but Kodril,
Sure.
please do that.
On the question, if I may just add one or two things to what you have said. I mean, I think this whole idea of do you want me there? Please. It's a very short response.
But it's okay.
Okay. The call to the media not to join the choir, I think, is an important call. We need to ask ourselves, what is corruption? Is it not corruption when certain individuals within the public sector and the private sector collude, get judgments from courts, ridiculous judgments, to the tune of billions of shillings for prosecuting minuscule claims when you look at it from a substantive legal standpoint? Is that corruption or is it not? So unless the media begins to really take a much more deeper dive on this conversation around corruption, we will just be talking, just like a wider stuff. But in relation to the structure of the State Capture Commission, I think we have a law already in place. We not only have a constitution, we have a law on presidential inquiry institutions. I believe it's chapter 102 of our laws. It's an old statute from the 1960s, but it's been aligned now to the new constitution. It is it provides sufficient safeguards, for the protection of the rights of persons adversely mentioned, but more fundamentally, it envisions a multi-agency approach, where all the agencies that are implicated, in that particular inquiry participate, or are invited to become members of that commission. And so we do not necessarily at this point in time envision that there will be conflict, but I can assure you that at the point of implementation,
in the right context, and for us, the context is institutionalize the war. Take it away from the personal, take it away from the political. Chairman. Chairman will just wrap up.
Loud, no, you're not.
You talked about stabilizing the economy in the past year. What is a stable economy? Then you say that you are looking into stimulating the economy through creation of jobs. How many jobs do you intend to create as Kwanza government in the first year and subsequent years? Then we've also talked about our public debt. And from our reading is that we are really burdened by the commercial loans. Are you planning as Kenya Kwanza to renegotiate some of these loans so that at least we find a staggered way of releasing some money that we can inject into our economy? And then the last one, I think our talk here has been dominated by slaying the dragon of corruption. And if we just do a quick check, when you look at both the coalitions, just do a quick check, look at the Auditor General reports, COB reports, all reports from our investigative agencies, we find that 90, if not more than 90%, have been involved in corruption in one way or the other. Are we now sure that after August 9, are we now saying that the August 9 will be our Damascus moment where all these souls will now turn into gold and now change or take forward this war on corruption?
Thank you. I'll be quick so that we wind up, but because we already elaborated, maybe just to emphasize. How do you stabilize an economy? What do you mean by stability? As I said, we have a foreign exchange crisis. You have seen businesses closing. So the first thing we need, on that sector, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out why are we rationing foreign exchange. You need to understand the economics behind it. We are rationing foreign exchange because we are unable to refinance our bonds because the markets have shut down. Today, the yield on our bond maturing in 2024 is now around 17%. It must be the worst performing in the world. It has gone up from about 13% a couple of weeks ago to 400 basis points since one Raila Odinga said we are going to restructure the debt. Why? Because restructuring your debt is a default action. So what the investors had is that they're going to get a haircut. Those of you who know market language understand what a haircut is. So when we made our investors panic. You never do that. So it's very frightening, people who don't do that taking over the economy. So the first thing with stabilization is you look at what happened in Zambia. In Zambia, you had a government which came in with an objective of creating economic confidence. And they actually positioned themselves saying, look, we need to restore the creditworthiness of Zambia, which was already in default, by the way, and still is. And you saw the Zambian president, the first thing he did, he went to reassure the markets. And things have stabilized, but they're still in default. But at least they are not going the Sri Lanka route. So these are not things that you write on paper immediately. The credibility is important. When I was in London a couple of weeks ago, I went to meet the markets, the people who buy our bonds, and we sat, and they asked me the same question: how are you going to stabilize this? And I asked them, okay, if we remove our political risk factor, where do you think we should be positioned in terms of the emerging market profile? And they told me Morocco, there, Tunisia. So that means we should be borrowing around our bonds should be trading at around 4 or 5% yield, but they are doing 17%. So this is work that you need to know how to do. It is not something that you say in a rally. Yeah? This is things you go, you know these people, you understand the markets, you restore confidence. That's step number one. Yeah. I talked about things we can do very quickly. I said over 3/4 of our interest is domestic. Foreign interest is not a problem. What is a problem with the foreign debt is foreign exchange. The real problem in terms of quantum is domestic. And the only way you can lower the quantum domestically is to bring our interest rates down, the cost of government borrowing money. Today the government is borrowing, domestic borrowing costs about 10%. Now, from an interest of 500 billion, if you bring down that 1 percentage point from 10 to 9, you save 50 billion. If you do it 2.5 percentage points, it's 125 billion shillings. In the foreign, you cannot actually get that kind of impact very quickly. So the next question is, how do we bring interest rates down very quickly? Now, that's work to do. It's not something I can tell you now that I will do this and it happens. It is not paper thing. It's a hands-on thing. So the thing that Kenyans have to ask themselves, which team is going to hit the ground running in terms of stabilizing the economy? Corruption, I'll hand back, but there is no silver bullet. We are not saying that human beings do not change. What we are saying is, let us have a national compact that the executive will not be lying that it can police itself. And then, by trying to police itself, it then decides who will be caught and who will not be caught, depending on your political alignment. So you're saying, let Kenyans say, let's have a level 1 rule for everyone. And that rule is in the Constitution. It says, we have created oversight bodies to watch the executive. Please stop asking the president to fight corruption. It is the president who can do the most corruption in the country, given our current structure. We need a system that can investigate the president. So please stop begging the president as if he's a sort of like superhuman being. He's an ordinary Kenyan. He's a mere mortal.
Dr. Lee, perhaps if I can ask the final question. Rational choice economics, you are an economist, and most of the people here were perhaps in ODM at some point and other political factions at another point. Now, rational choice economics, my interest comes first. And in politics, the only thing that stays constant is perhaps the interest, which is basically the economy. So how feasible perhaps is your plans to actually eradicate corruption? And perhaps question number 2, do you think your strategy is top up and not bottom down? So do you think that you should start at the very basic level, perhaps nursery school, they don't copy and then move up the corporate level?
Let's do the following.
It's not be listening.
Let's have a conversation. I am happy to sort of have this conversation. This is a conversation we should have. Should we institutionalize or personalize our fight against corruption? Do we trust an individual to be good? There's a thing we used to say with friends of mine. But what is your theory of human nature? Is your theory of human nature that we are fallen angels, or are we reason apes?
But everyone is selfish. Everyone has.
Yeah, and that's a point. Because we are all selfish, the thing which arbitrates our interests is institutions. That's why we create institutions. Go back to your basic political science 101. Hobbes, Locke, social contract. And the fundamental institution is the Constitution. Because we are all selfish, if you put me and I'm holding the knife, I will cut a bigger chunk for myself. So we have a rule about how that will be shared, and we make sure that the person holding the knife has to cut equal shares. That's what institutions are for. Maybe we go back to the theory.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ndi. 2 years ago, when the Kenya Kwanza presidential candidate announced publicly that he is going to influence to change the conversation in this country from the usual conversations we've known to a conversation of content, and particularly on the economy, I think right now we should give him credit, because that is the discussion in the country now. And I'm glad that Kenya Kwanza has put out the plan on how it will want to organize government once it wins election. And many of my colleagues here, led by Dr. Ndi, have already spoken about that plan. And that plan is based on what the people have told us we should do once the electors on August, 9th of August. And that plan speaks on quite a number of issues which have been detailed, but also looking at resolving bottlenecks in the value chains. And those bottlenecks includes the corruption that has been discussed here. Because in each of all these value chains, there are certain bottlenecks, be it legal, be it administrative, be it institutional, that my colleagues have spoken into, and that plan addresses that. There is no particular political party or coalition that has presented a much better plan for fighting corruption than we have in the plan of Kenya Kwanza. It's got to be implementing the structures, the institutions which are in the Constitution, because that Constitution was meant to bring in the balance of power between the various institutions. If we strengthen the office of the Inspector General of Police, provide that office with the financial independence, not now when it is depending on the office of the President to finance its activities, yet it is a constitutional independent office. If we give it independence and then appoint the right people, that office can now be able to take decisions without referring to anybody. And so is all the other constitutional bodies that are earmarked to look at issues of rule of law and also issues of corruption. And I think we've got to give faith to that particular process. And I will urge the media to interrogate these issues and just not look at these issues at face value. Look at the details of what we are facing, because why is the cost of living very high? Why is there huge unemployment? Why are companies closing down and losing work? We've got to interrogate what is causing all this and look at the relationships and address them. And our plan addresses that. I do not think Azimio plan addresses that in any way. It is just talking of so many things without knowing which is a priority and which is a critical problem of Kenyans. So that is a plan we've got to provide. But in front of us now is to win an election. One of our roadmaps moving after the launch of the plan is to sign the national and county charters. This is going to be happening within this month. You'll be getting the dates for that particular signing, so that we can now make commitments with the city and then the entire citizenry of Kenya in a charter that is going to be implementing the plan. The commitment we'll be providing. That is the road we'll be driving down. As we galvanize for votes, I would urge the media to be responsible. I would urge the media to report things as they are. I would urge the media not to sensationalize. We've seen headlines that are speaking to issues that could create tension in the country. When you relate to a leader of Kenya Kwanza and say he has been out there speaking to the company that is supplying IBC with ballot papers, and then you look at the story inside, it is talking of a different thing. The media is part of what is creating tension in the country. And I will urge the media to move away from that. Please be responsible in your reporting. Even if you have some of you have taken sides, be responsible in your reporting. Do not take us that road where we will have tensions in this country again. We will want to see a fair and credible election. We will want to see IBC do the best it can to provide an election that will give us the ultimate winners in this contest, both presidential and all the other seats that are being contested. But we will also want to see our opponents, together with ourselves, commit to that process. Let us resolve whatever problems that are relating to the electoral process amicably. IBC has provided that roadmap, and we as Kenya Kwanza, we are ready to follow that. We are ready to point up areas we think that should be improved so that we have a free and fair election, and then we don't cause this country another misery. It is already in misery. The economy is in shambles. We don't want to cause it another misery that will bring us to crash. So I will only urge all the players to be responsible as we move forward. And I will hope that moving forward, we can candidly discuss the Kenya Kwanza plan as it is and seek clarification where it may be required. I thank you.
David, you want to?
No, thank you very much for coming. We are open to do interviews on any of these issues. You can pick a theme. We will let you know. Hussein is here. If you...
Gidai.
Pardon me?
Gidai is here.
Yeah, not that I'm saying. If you reach out to Hussein, all of you who's our head of communication, Hussein will be able then to identify the right person to come to your show or to give you an interview. That's partly why we wanted. All these people will be available, and they are experts in the manifesto. So we will be able to sort of then channel the right person to be able to speak to it on any technical issues you want clarification.
Asanteni sana na tunataka kura yenu.
Na mtupatie kura.
Nyinyi sasa kama mpiga kura tunataka mpigie William Ruto kura. Sababu nyinyi ni wapiga kura.
Iko chai lakini hiyo ni sio ya kutoka kwa serikali. Tumechanga.
You just met me now. My name's Corey. You know, instead on the group, I saw saying Dr. Singh is on NTV.